Jaggi of FanSided here with NFL expert Marcus Mosher to talk about the looming franchise tag decisions, players going and staying. Marcus, free agency is on the horizon. We can see potentially what's coming, and I want to ask what you think about some of these players here. We're going to talk about some big names: Trey Hendrickson, Kenneth Walker, the Super Bowl champion running back, George Pickens. Marcus, your Dallas Cowboys. Which direction should these teams go? This is the Stacking the Box podcast brought to you by FanSided. Make sure you're checking out fansided.com and all of its affiliate websites for all of your football news daily. Marcus, where do we start from here? Let's talk about the franchise tag. And as of today, right now, teams can assign the franchise or the transition tags on players. I know there's a big list of guys that we can go through here. What are your overall thoughts?
Yeah, we don't get a ton of players that are franchise tagged anymore because teams like to get these deals done as soon as possible. But there are a couple of positions that tend to have a lot of tags. And we're going to talk about running backs in a little bit. We'll talk about the Cowboys who use the franchise tag, it seems like every single year. But it is one of the more interesting times because a lot of these players don't want to be tagged. They want to hit free agency. Yeah. They want to see what the open market has to offer. But a lot of these teams, they don't want their players to get exposed to the other 31 teams. And that's why it's just always a little back and forth dance that we get every offseason.
Yeah, there's a big risk involved there. If you hit the open market, you could potentially be signed away by not just another team, potentially a team rival. It can go in lots of different directions, but I think it's important to maybe start, Marcus, by looking at some of the numbers here for the franchise tag. This is at Spot Track. Starting at the quarterback position, $47.4 million for the franchise tag. Wide receiver, $28 million. Offensive line, it's just the whole thing grouped together, even though there's obviously offensive tackles, guards, centers, should be separate, all lumped together, $27.8 million. Linebackers, $27.6 million. We'll talk about Devin, Lloyd, and what players out there are kind of throwing off that curve to make it such a steep price, but $27.6 million. Some defensive tackles, defensive ends. Trey Hendrickson would fall into that category, $26.7 million. Corners, safeties, $20.8 million. It's not cheap to do this. Tight end, $16 million. Let's talk about some of the names, Marcus, on the list here in a second, but where do you think is the biggest discrepancy? Like, this tag is just not worth the value at all, what you're getting.
Well, linebackers one, and the reason why it's so off right now is the NFL doesn't differentiate between off-ball linebackers and edge rushers. So a guy like Micah Parsons and TJ Watt, who both got big contracts last offseason, according to the NFL, they're designated as linebackers. So now someone like Devin Lloyd, who had an awesome season for Jacksonville, I mean, he probably won't mind playing on the franchise tag because that pays him at the very, very top of the off-ball linebacker market. But for Jacksonville, there's no value at all, right? You're paying him like he's a pass rusher, and he's clearly not. That's one I would love to see the NFL eventually figure out.
Yeah, and it's kind of mind-boggling that they haven't been able to do it by now. Like, we can watch these players and see your role is to get after the quarterback. How are you not designated as at least a defensive end, or group those together if you want to say edge position? Like, that's what I think we got to get with the times in terms of this, because it really does impact teams like the Jaguars, who would love to have Devin Lloyd back, but they should be able to get him for like 16, 18 million and not $28 million. Like, that's a huge difference.
Well, Tommy, I'll give you another one. The Ravens drafted Tyler Linderbaum in round one. He became everything that they've ever wanted him to become. Yeah. But because the fifth-year option is much like the franchise tag, where it's just all offensive linemen, he's gotten to a point where if the Ravens franchise tag him, he's automatically the highest paid center in the league. And there's just no value in doing that. And that's why I think Baltimore is eventually going to let Linderbaum hit the free agent market. And that's really tough for, a franchise that hit on a player in round one, but now they're having to let him go because this is what the market does to these players.
Yeah, it's truly unfortunate. They have to be able to fix this, because if we as fans and sitting here, armchair analysts, can see the glaring issues with the franchise tag, the NFL should be able to see that as well. Has a big impact, Marcus. Let's talk about some of the names that could potentially be franchised out there. And we'll get into specifics here in just a little bit. George Pickens is obviously one of them, one of the highest profile potential free agents on the entire market: Daniel Jones, the quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts, who had a breakout season; Kenneth Walker, Super Bowl champion running back; Dafe Owe, Trey Hendrickson, the edge rushers; Kyle Pitts, the tight end; Breece Hall. Is there any other names that you want to add to that mix that could be in the potential for a franchise tag?
I think you look at players like Alec Pierce and Wan'Dale Robinson, like good receivers for their respective teams. I think both the Giants and the Colts would love to hold on to those guys. But is Wan'Dale Robinson worth 25, 26 million a year? Is Alec Pierce worth that number? I think he's a better player. Probably not. But Tommy, I also wouldn't be surprised if these teams, they put the franchise tag on as a placeholder, trying to get a long-term deal done, because I think the moment Alec Pierce hits free agency, he's gone. Like, there's going to be so many teams that are out there looking for receiver help that are going to want Alec Pierce. I would not be shocked if a team like the Colts said, oh, you know what, it's an overpay by $4 or $5 million, but we can't afford to lose the asset.
Yeah, there's like 30 teams out there that need wide receiver help. Which team doesn't need 4 or 5 good wide receivers and they have 1 or 2 or 3 on the roster? Like, these guys are going to get overpaid. That's what the trends tell us. There's only a few of them out there this year. Alec Pierce is one of them. Wan'Dale's the other one. If you want a receiver that has youth and production, the list ends right there, essentially. Like, you might be able to go after like an old Mike Evans who's been injured in recent years. Like, there's just not any appealing options. And so it's easy to see why the market would go so high for these guys. Let's talk about George Pickens, though, in the big looming decision Dallas has to make. I think you and I are on the same page with this, Marcus. We look at contracts at the receiver position around the league. There's some pretty steep values. However, you dig down just a few names here. I mean, Jamar Chase at $40.25 million, absolutely huge average yearly value. Pickens isn't getting that because the market's not going to be as big for a receiver who a lot of teams, quite frankly, had off their board ahead of the 2022 NFL draft. But you go down just a few names. DK Metcalf at $33 million, Garrett Wilson at $32.5 million, Brandon Ayuk at $30 million. George Pickens is better than all of those guys pretty easily. Now, the franchise tag for wide receiver, Marcus, we just talked about, $28.0 million projected franchise tag this year. That's a savings to me. And if you're Dallas, why not give Pickens the franchise tag and give him another maybe prove it year to show that he's going to keep his head on and he's going to have another productive season?
I've got another possibility here. What if they do the transition tag? So if you're not familiar with the transition tag, what this does, it actually gives you a lower guaranteed money. So it would be 1 year, $25 million. And it would allow Pickens to actually test free agency. If he were to sign a deal with another team, the Cowboys would have the opportunity to match. And let's say over the next 2 or 3 weeks, the Cowboys and Pickens just aren't close. Pickens feels like he can go get more money in the open market. Maybe the Cowboys do slap the transition tag on, and then they let Pickens explore, because maybe a team like the Titans offers 4 years at $34 million. The Cowboys can either let him walk and get a compensatory pick, or they could match that offer. And if there's a lot of hard feelings between David Mulligetta and Jerry Jones, maybe that would be the best solution for both parties.
Yeah. So let me ask you then straight up, if you can have the guarantee at, I get you for this season, $28 million, or run the risk of potentially losing Pickens in paying more on a deal, is that what you're in favor of?
Maybe, because I think the idea is that a lot of Cowboy fans want George Pickens back on a long-term deal, and maybe they feel like they don't want to go through the song and dance again of all this public negotiation. Just let another team do the negotiation for you. You know, again, if the Titans think he's worth $34 million and Pickens would be okay playing there, you sign the deal, then the Cowboys' decision's easy. You either give him that contract or you let him walk. And I think for me, after all the drama they went through with Micah Parsons last offseason, this would be kind of nice. It takes a lot of the work out, off the plate of Jerry Jones. I don't know if they're going to go in that direction, but it's a fascinating thing to think about.
Yeah, and I think the biggest scare there is that you get one desperate team that really lacks a wide receiver like the Titans, and they're willing to grossly overpay him. Worst case scenario, you get a comp pick, but a comp pick is not going to get you a 1,400-yard, 10-touchdown receiver like George Pickens coming off of a career year. It would be a loss for Dallas's offense for sure if they lose him. Now, it's interesting, Marcus, because we kind of are kind of a great duo to talk about. Pickens, former Steeler, goes to Cowboys. I'm a Steelers fan. followed him very closely, and then he goes to your Dallas Cowboys. In Pittsburgh, things got really bad with Pickens, like to the point where both you and I had conversations, and we said straight up, the Steelers can't go a fourth season with this guy on their roster. Relationships have been tarnished, terrible responses to the media, quit on his team at times. He didn't really show much of that in Dallas. Would you be worried if you're a team signing him either Cowboys to a franchise tag, which is all fully guaranteed, or to a long-term deal?
Yeah, and that's why I think this transition tag is fascinating, because I think the number of teams that would be willing to give him a long-term contract with, let's say, 80% guaranteed is going to be very, very small without having him in their building. Remember, he was available before the draft for a top 3-round pick. Nobody was interested. The only reason the Cowboys were interested is because they wanted Tedero McMillan at number 12. He didn't make it to them. They didn't draft the receiver. They kind of panicked, and they traded for Pickens. And that was on a cheap deal, and nobody else wanted him. So I do wonder what Pickens' market would look like on, in free agency. And maybe this is a good way for David Mulugheta, Pickens, and Jerry Jones to kind of come to some common ground, either on the exclusive franchise tag or on the transition tag.
All right, you're tuned into Stacking the Box, where NFL fans come to talk, celebrate, and debate. For more coverage, hit up fansided.com, powered by the passionate fans at FanSided. Marcus, let's talk now about some of the other transition tags, or franchise tags, rather. Kenneth Walker was exceptional in the Super Bowl, Marcus. Just a phenomenal performance. Ended up winning the Super Bowl MVP. It greatly aided the Seahawks during their fantastic run in 2025 and throughout the postseason. He wants paid, and you can't blame the guy. I mean, he's got the reputation now, coming off a 1,000-yard season, average 4.6 yards a carry, 9.1 yards of reception, an extremely efficient season. But the Seahawks have a decision to make, because do you pay a running back? And Marcus, I know you have a post out there on X talking about the percent of money devoted to running back positions, and there's almost zero correlation between teams that win the Super Bowl. Are we in a situation now, Marcus, where we feel like the Seahawks, as bad as it sounds to say, they got their use out of Gainwell, and now it's just time to let him walk and get a set of fresh legs back there?
It's tricky, because I think if Zach Charbonnet didn't tear his ACL in the playoffs, I think this would be an easy decision. You let Walker, walk, and you draft the running back on day 2 or day 3, and you continue that cycle. But with Charbonnet likely out for the entire 2026 season, you kind of can't leave that position bare. My guess is that he's going to be back on a long-term deal, but I don't think the franchise tag is going to happen. I think they're going to let him hit the market, see what else is out there, and then I bet you Kenneth Walker and his agent come back and say, hey, this is the deal we got. Can you guys match it? And Seattle's going to do their best to keep him. But I wouldn't be surprised if Walker gets a lot of money, because Seattle was very careful in the way that they used him. They didn't overwork him the last couple of years. He's coming off an incredible postseason run. I'm fascinated by Kenneth Walker's market.
Yeah, I am too. And the franchise tag for this offseason, $14.2 million to running backs. But here's the dilemma, Marcus. The running backs getting 14 or more million in the NFL right now: Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, and Jonathan Taylor. Do you feel like Kenneth Walker? He's not in that tier. And I think it's pretty obvious that he is not in that tier. Those are like offensive player of the year candidates, every one of those guys right there. And I just don't know if you can justify doing that in today's NFL, where we know that running games matter, and there's a handful of running backs that do this. Isn't to say that Kenneth Walker isn't valuable, but when you look at the money devoted to that position, you can get good production out of that position. I think they have. The biggest dilemma, Marcus, is when you lose Clint Kubiak and you lose Zach Charbonnet, can you afford to also lose Kenneth Walker in the same offseason?
And that's going to be the tricky part here. My guess is that Seattle brings him back because they're not having to pay a quarterback a ton of money right now. They're not paying Jackson Smith-Njigba a ton of money. They've got cap space. I think they're going to want to run it back one more year, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not for $14 million a year. It's more like $12 million a season, and maybe it's a shorter term deal.
Yeah, I can definitely see something like that happening. I think that would work out for both parties if they were to do something like that. Marcus, let's keep this running back conversation going now from Kenneth Walker to Breece Hall, a guy who's been up and down, has had some success in his career, also dealt with injuries. What should the Jets do with Breece Hall here?
I think they should franchise tag him. They've got the cap space, but I think you franchise him not with the idea of signing him to a long-term contract, but potentially trading him. If you're the Jets, you're looking at this as a full rebuild. By the time that you get your quarterback, which is probably going to be in 2027, you're going to need some picks to just boost up the offensive line, to get more playmakers around that quarterback. I think if you could franchise tag Hall and then trade him for, let's say, a third round pick, I think that's probably fair. This is not a very good running back draft. There's going to be teams that have a running back need that just don't get that guy early in the draft. I think he still has some trade value. I don't think it makes sense for the Jets to sign him to a long-term deal, but I do think it makes sense to franchise him because you don't want to lose the asset.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I would not sign him to a long-term deal because of the state of the Jets, knowing that they could have a whole new coaching staff by next offseason. They're just not there. And I don't see devoting those resources to a running back. If you can get trade value for him, I'm all for that. But Marcus, I would push back a little bit and say a running back who's been plagued with injuries, who needs a new contract, and it's got some wear and tear on the tires now. Can you get a third-round pick? Or are we looking more like a day 3 pick here?
It probably would be a third or fourth round pick because, again, there's going to be teams that need running backs. There's probably 9 or 10 teams that are in the market. And if you're a team like the Chiefs, right, Isaiah Pacheco's a free agent, you have a top 10 pick, but do you really want to use it on Jeremiah Love? If the answer is no, there's not really a running back in this class that deserves to go inside the top 100 outside of Love. Do you just completely whiff on that position again? Especially with Patrick Mahomes, coming off a major injury? Or do you send your third round pick to the Jets and get somebody who is proven, who's explosive? I do think there would be a market for Breece Hall if he were to be traded.
All right. From the highs, the heartbreaks, every headline, this is Stacking the Box, your source of NFL talk, powered by FanSided.com, the voices of FanSided. Let's talk defensive side of the ball here, Marcus, and let's go over to Trey Hendrickson, a guy that was really at the center of a lot of conversation the last 2 seasons, had back-to-back 17-sack seasons for the Cincinnati Bengals, has really been kind of the lone bright spot on an otherwise atrocious Bengals defense. What's the deal? Like, where do we go from here? He was involved in trade rumors last year and now hitting the market. I mean, should the Bengals kind of just say, let's kind of wash our hands of this and let you go at this stage of his career? I mean, I think for sure Hendrickson would like to play somewhere else, right, where he can be on a good defense and more competitive defense.
Probably, and he's also talked about how frustrating it was to deal with Mike Brown in the front office in Cincinnati. And if I'm the Bengals and you're looking at the franchise tag, I don't think guaranteeing him $30+ million a year makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
He's been really banged up. That's the reason why he left the Saints in the first place. I think the Bengals might be better off taking that $25-30 million, investing it in a couple other positions because their depth is terrible. I mean, they need 6 or 7 new starters on defense. And we saw over the last couple of years, even with a healthy Trey Hendrickson, who was getting 17.5 sacks, the defense was still awful. And I think it's time to get younger and more explosive. Hendrickson was never a good run defender. I know that puts you in the market for another defensive end, but I don't think they got their bang for their buck last year, and it's all about projecting forward. I think it's time for the Bengals to move on.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And as good as Hendrickson has been as an edge rusher, Marcus, coming off and getting after the quarterback, it hasn't, unfortunately, raised the level of the Bengals defense. They're still a bottom tier defense, and he's going to be old. I don't see giving him that contract. I don't see giving him the franchise tag. That's a lot of money tied up. I think it's best for both parties to part ways at this point, Marcus. And I want to end with an interesting conversation here. Devin, Lloyd, Travis Etienne, both on the Jacksonville Jaguars. If you can only keep one of these guys, what are you doing here? If you can only tag one, both are in need of contracts now.
And it's tough because Etienne had a phenomenal year last year. And he does a little bit of everything for Jacksonville's offense. And they do have Bashal Tutin, who they drafted in round 4 last year. But Tutin was not the most reliable player. He still has a lot of work to do as a pass blocker and a receiver. But the issue with Devin Lloyd is he's going to be really expensive. And you mentioned the franchise tag at the top. $27 million, I believe, is what it would be for a linebacker. I don't think you can justify that as an off-ball linebacker. And again, he was an all-pro player this year. I would probably prioritize Lloyd because it's harder to find linebackers than it is running back. But if you're telling me it's going to cost twice or maybe like 2.5 times more to get Lloyd than Etienne, that's where you lose me a little bit.
100%. I mean, that is such a steep tag for an off-ball linebacker. What I would try to do, my preference, if I was a Jags fan, get Lloyd signed to a long-term deal. Even if you have to pay him top of the market, off-ball linebacker, I think that is much rarer in today's NFL to find a linebacker that can get you the splash plays and the 5 interception season in just 15 games. Like, Lloyd is genuinely one of the best off-ball linebackers in the league. Etienne is a good running back. I think that is going to be easier to replace, especially with what the Jags already have on their roster. That would be the direction that I would pick if you can't franchise him. Any other closing thoughts, Marcus?
No, I mean, we don't see the franchise tag used all the time, but I am watching Kyle Pitts in Atlanta, who had a phenomenal year last year. He looked healthier. Does Kevin Stefanski want him, or does he go out and sign someone like David Njoku, who he had in Cleveland? Keep an eye on that Kyle Pitts situation because it's not very often that 24, 25-year-old stud tight ends become available.
No, it is not. This is the Stacking the Box show. It premieres every Tuesday and Thursday evening on YouTube. Be sure to check it out. You can follow Marcus's work on X at Marcus_Mosher. You can follow me on X at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Stacking the Box podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube. You can follow my written content on stillcurtain.com and check out Marcus's written work on fansided.com and the FanSided NFL Network. Be sure to check out fansided.com for all of your daily sports news and opinions, and make sure you come back for more video content. And thanks again for listening to Stacking the Box.